what has happened in Nepal, it is part of the Bangladesh playbook. But then, these events don't take place in isolation. There is something that is happening on ground. Somebody pushes it, and then comes a tipping point, or what is called the kindling temperature, where everything goes into fire. The politics in Nepal has been quite unscrupulous. It actually reminds you of the politics of India in 1990s. The public generally is quite unhappy with what is the state of affairs in Nepal. There is hardly any governance over there. The public-politician disconnect is there, and people do not get what they perceive they should be getting. What you're looking now is you're looking at young leadership. You're looking at, somebody like who's the mayor of Kathmandu, that is Balendra Shah. If you look at all that has been happening in the neighborhood, particularly Bangladesh, particularly Sri Lanka, particularly Pakistan, Afghanistan, the only place right now that is stable in the Indian neighborhood is actually Bhutan. Everything else has gone into pieces. And you see a lot of Western activity in the region. You saw the Delhi riots in February 2020. You have seen various movements going on all over the place. But as long as the central leadership is strong,
Hello and welcome. Over the last few years, India's neighborhood has been in turmoil. From Myanmar's military coup in 2021 to the Taliban's return in Afghanistan. The political upheavals that we saw in Pakistan and Sri Lanka, the leadership change in Maldives, and Bangladesh's Prime Minister fleed to India. We are now seeing yesterday the resignation of Nepal's Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli. What does this mean? The cascading crises of South Asia and across the wider region. How should India respond to the instability that we are seeing nearly on every border? To help us make sense of this shifting landscape, we have with us today Shishir Gupta, the executive editor of Hindustan Times, who will help us unpack what are the driving political forces in these earthquakes that we are seeing across the Indian region. What does it mean for India? What does it mean for the future of Southeast Asia and the global geopolitical affairs in general? But to start with, Shishir, what is happening in Nepal, and doesn't it look exactly similar to what had happened in Bangladesh, say about a year back?
Namaskar, Shubhajit. See, the current situation in Nepal is that since last night there has been no violence. The Nepalese army is deployed totally, and till the time about an hour ago also there were hardly any reports of violence. There is a possibility of the student leaders and those who are nationalists, who have a reach to the youth and the youngsters, or what has been defined as Generation Z, they are going to get together to see how do they go forward. Now, what has happened in Nepal, it is part of the Bangladesh playbook. But then, these events don't take place in isolation. There is something that is happening on ground. Somebody pushes it, and then comes a tipping point, or what is called the kindling temperature, where everything goes into fire, or everything sort of really goes ballistic. Now, in Nepal, the politics in Nepal has been quite unscrupulous. It actually reminds you of the politics of India in 1990s. Ayaram, Gayaram, horse trading, this, that, and everybody, nobody having any scruples about it, right? So it's quite Machiavellian in its own style. Now in Nepal, the old guard, particularly after the abolition of monarchy, they got the Maoist over there, and then the Maoists split, and then you had 15 prime ministers in 17 years, so on and so forth. So the public generally is quite unhappy with what is the state of affairs in Nepal. There is hardly any governance over there. The public-politician disconnect is there, and people do not get what they perceive they should be getting for their country. And the general state of governance plus corruption is huge. So Nepal would actually remind you of Bihar of the 1990s in many ways. Now what has happened is, so the kindling temperature, or the tipping point came when they banned the social media websites. So that gave one thing for all of them to get together back, because that was the only opening for them to the world. But then there are other forces behind it also, because these social media Sites are also not simple social media sites. They convey a message. There is a perception. There is perception is bigger than reality. There is orchestration of a narrative, so on and so forth. But what you're looking now is you're looking at young leadership. You're looking at somebody like who's the mayor of Kathmandu, that is Balendra Shah. So you're looking at a leader like Rabi Lami Chena, and these are the people who sort of have a connect to the youth, which is right now quite disturbed, and they want the old guard to be totally decimated, which it has been done. Now, the old guard per se, which was represented whether it by Oli or by Prachanda or by Sher Bahadur Deoba or by multiple these leaders, the communist leaders, I mean, they have been quite discredited and have been discredited for the past. Now, these people have been playing China against India. They keep on doing this for their own survival and for their own benefits. Let me tell you something very interesting. You see, there was this huge issue that was raised by Oli when he introduced this, published a map saying that Limpu Dhara or Lipu Lake was part of Nepal. Now, I can tell you with certainty that this whole thing was to develop this pro-Nepal sentiment against India, and India was made the villain. But do you know who was behind the whole show? The whole show was actually Prachanda who came with this idea. He pushed in Oli for this. So this is one leadership which is sort of pro-China, and the old guard has been playing, one against the other for their own personal, financial as well as other benefits. Now, what is going to happen now? See, the government has resigned. You will possibly be looking at the dissolution of parliament, because otherwise the caretaker government headed by whether it is Rabi or whether it is Balendra Shah does not work. So once that happens, then there will be a caretaker government. The caretaker government can also introduce some certain changes in the constitution. For instance, some of these leaders have been there, have become prime ministers for five times. Maybe they would limit it to 2 times a prime minister. Maybe they would bring in other elements to ensure more accountability, better governance, and making that country more economically viable. Plus, somehow to remove this burgeoning unemployment. So you will be looking at that, and then possibly you will be looking at election. But let me tell you one thing, Subhajit. See, having a revolution it can be a game changer only if the future is better than what was in the past. What the revolutions or what the so-called Arab Spring have shown us, and maybe this South Asian Spring, whatever it is, if you were to call it, if it does not lead to a more, cohesive, sustainable government, then the entire experiment will fail.
So, one thing that I'll pick from here is you mentioned 2 things. One is the condition the ground is ripe. There is enough anti-government sentiment which is present in the ground, which we saw there's a general lack of connect between the leaders who were there and the general mass in general. That's why we see the Kathmandu mayor, someone who's also an avid rapper and whose music is all about protest poetry and all, coming into the fore, who's connecting much better with the audience. And also, even while we talk about the social media ban, it got banned because of the entire Nepo baby trends, where there were trends of how nepotism is creeped in, how the entire Nepal is suffering, the kids of the leaders or government officials or others are not just surviving, they're thriving. But there also another point to it which you mentioned as that some sort of an external support. So when you say this, what do you mean? How much in the case of Nepal, these are early days of course, but how would you say, how much of was it which was the thrive which came in from the people in general, and how much do you think there was some sort of a help which was provided by some of the external factors? And if yes, then who would be these external factors?
See, it is not very easy to say right now what external factors are there. But if you look at all that has been happening in the neighborhood, particularly Bangladesh, particularly Sri Lanka, particularly Pakistan, Afghanistan, the only place right now that is stable in the Indian neighborhood is actually Bhutan. Everything else has gone into pieces. And you see a lot of Western activity in the region. Now, what happens normally is that, there is an event or an issue on which the entire public or the public sentiment coalesces. Now that event has to be sort of extrapolated to bring into an actionable event, which is what has happened yesterday. I mean, the violence, which is not good, but this is also a part of what the so-called uprising or a revolution is. Now, somebody has to sort of, really push it further. The orchestration of the whole thing requires also an effort. You saw it in Sri Lanka. You saw the Western activity in Sri Lanka. You saw the Western activity in Bangladesh, right? But Bangladesh, what happened was that it was the West plus the Islamist. In Myanmar, they tried it. But again, Myanmar being the country where the army has seeped into the society, so it's so very difficult to change. You saw it in Pakistan, removal of Imran Khan, but that was by Pakistan army, held by the West. You saw in Afghanistan, there was an agreement that things will move on peacefully, but it did not happen ultimately. So there is obviously some orchestration, what is these days easily defined as the deep state. But definitely there is a movement which is there, a swell on the ground, which has been pushed by a certain narrative. And when you see these social media, these are mega billion-dollar corporations. So this doesn't happen so simply as that. Plus, you have a huge ground support and a huge anti-politician support. This is actually in Nepal, this is a vote against the decrepit old order. Whether it was Oli, Prachanda, or whosoever it is. Unfortunately, people died in violence. And another thing that happens is that, whether it is Bangladesh, whether it is Sri Lanka, whether it is Nepal, these army over there, I mean, they're basically ceremonial armies. So it's very difficult for them to control, and that is why you see much more reaction. That's why you see people getting killed, because there is the escalatory ladder is reached very fast over there. So that is the whole problem. But right now, if you were to say, definitely there is a push coming. Now, future will tell us, where did the push come from?
Well, of course, and the groundswell of support against the establishment is something which we've seen not just now. I mean, I remember reporting from Nepal 10 years ago, and even then there was the distress that we saw among the local people about the polity in general was way higher than what we've seen. So probably takes that many years also for the anger to ferment and turn into something else. But if to brings the focus back in-house, India is seeing crisis on almost every border. As you just mentioned, apart from Bhutan, everything is up in flames. So something or the other is constantly happening. Pakistan is the way that Pakistan has always been. Sri Lanka has been unstable. There's some semblance of stability coming in. There is Taliban in Afghanistan, now Bangladesh and Nepal. So what does it mean for India now? What is it? How does it play its politics? It's the diplomatic tightrope that it needs to walk. And how does this entire crisis bode for India?
See, for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, the neighborhood is not give and take. I am being very categorical on that. He is willing to support everybody in the neighborhood. Whether it was Sri Lanka, he gave money to Sri Lanka. Whether it was Maldives, he supported Maldives. Whether it was Bangladesh, he pushed in money, pushed in effort for Bangladesh, right? Whether it is Myanmar, he's in touch with them. Particularly Nepal, he has been totally supportive of Nepal, the Nepalese people. But it is the politicians who wanted to sort of gain popularity on the basis of anti-India sentiment. So basically what India will do is, India will try and ensure that the peace and stability exist in the region. It's not a simple thing. And for that to happen, India needs to know what is really happening in that country. And for that, you need to have better understanding, better transparency of what really is happening. Particularly in, for instance, like we've been able to sort of come back with Maldives. We've been able to come back with Sri Lanka. We have now ties with Taliban. We are supplying humanitarian support to Taliban. Pakistan is another picture, okay? So Pakistan is out of the entire thing because Pakistan has decided to play the terrorism game. Had Pakistan not decided to play terrorism game, then that would have also been changed. Bangladesh, India is out to help. India is not there to destroy anything. It's trying to help them out as to what they want. But in Bangladesh, you have the Islamist game playing over there. Okay, the mainstream parties are gone. So what you are seeing is you are seeing a new generation coming out. Now in Nepal also you will see the second rung leadership. The first rung leadership has been all decimated of these parties. The second rung leadership, particularly like people like Gagan Thapa from the Nepalese Congress. I mean the man is elect from Kathmandu. So you will see young leadership coming out, but this young leadership has to perform. Otherwise, the result is worse than what is actually the solution to it. Now, if you what you're talking about, what you did in Nepal, I was there when the king was ruling and when how everything happened. So when the monarchy was there, and I was there, and when monarchy was there, you decided that you would bring in the Maoist who would provide a better solution to monarchies. But the Maoists turned out to be equally worse than the monarchies. So now you are again coming into one more churn. Now, the only thing is whether this churn delivers. Just changing the government does not mean anything. What you need is, can you provide more accountability to your people? Can you provide more economic stability to your people? Can you provide more security to your people? That is where it lies. And it's not a simple task. So India will do all it needs to do with Nepal, considering that Nepal, we have a porous border with Nepal, and there is a Bihar election.
Of course.
Right? So India will do everything. And Prime Minister has been very clear on that. He's not looking for any quid pro quo with this. But it is for these countries to realize as to what is really happening.
But that brings me to the question that now what would be India's response to the entire Nepalese crisis? And because, like Nepal's polity for the longest time has been divided into pro-China versus pro-India, or pitting China against India. So now, so India being such a big stakeholder, and we're seeing also social media videos where comments are coming in from both sides of the emotion here, asking for help or asking for India to go away, or both. So what is India's response going to be to the Nepalese crisis?
See, yesterday there was a cabinet committee on security meeting in which the Nepalese crisis was discussed, and after which the Prime Minister posted that he's looking for peace and stability only in Nepal. So as far as we are concerned, we will support anything that leads to peace and stability. We do not have a candidate that this is our prime ministerial candidate. We do not have a candidate, this is our presidential candidate. We do not have a candidate that this is man who's going to restore everything. It is for the Nepalese people to decide. Now, over the past 2 decades, after the abolition of the monarchy, it is the Nepalese Maoists which were close to the Chinese, and the Chinese had invested in whole detail. Now, when the monarchy was removed, that time the Americans were very much into it because the monarchy was again going close to China. So what has happened over there is that if you look at it right now, Oli was there for the SCO summit. Oli attended the Chinese military parade. So obviously the man did not know what is happening within his own country. So the point is, India does not have a candidate. There is no Prime Minister Modi's candidate. India is saying, you remain peaceful, you remain stable, and whatever you have to do, you decide amongst yourself. Right? That is what our game is, and that's exactly what. But as far as if you need any support, then you come and reach out to me. This is what it is. This exactly happened what in Sri Lanka when Rajpaksha was thrown out. This exactly the same thing. I mean, Mohammad Moizu came on an anti-India slogan, but today Mohammad Moizu knows that it is India which is going to come to its support. I mean, China is way off. Right? And you know what has happened to Pakistan.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, and Bangladesh, possibly you will see an election next year. But what is going to thrown out and what is being seen over there, if you see the rise of Islamists, there is going to be a huge problem for India. So these are countries which have borders with India. And India has to watch them very carefully so that there is no spill out in India. Second thing, which is very important, internally India has to also watch out.
So that's the question I was coming to actually, that it's almost like a country a year. We saw Sri Lanka, then we saw Bangladesh last year, and this is Nepal. So how does it bode for India right now? Are there signals or signs to watch out for, or is there a chance that something of this can also happen in India?
See, if you look at Indian history, civilization history, you will see India growing whenever there is a strong center. You can look at all the kings and all the emperors. You will see whenever there is a strong center, India holds and India expands. Now, you have a strong central leadership right now, strong political leadership. But that strong political leadership has to watch out, because there is ferment within. There is ferment at the subterranean level. There could be, these the so-called left liberals. There could be so-called Islamists who could sort of join hands, supported by somebody else. Again, we're coming into the deep state, and somehow ferment some sort of disturbance, violence. You saw the Delhi riots in February 2020. You have seen various movements going on all over the place. But as long as the central leadership is strong and it delivers to the public, India doesn't have to worry about it.
Thank you so much for talking to us, Shishir, on this wide variety of topics which can be brought down under the single umbrella of crisis in the neighborhood. So that brings us to the end of the show, but the fact remains that this is going to be a tight diplomatic watch out that India will have to do, and while also have to see how it engages with the next generation of leadership, because everywhere, wherever we've seen these revolutions, there are a new set of leaders who've come in whose playbook is not known, whose history is not known. So how this unfolds is something that both you and I will have to watch throughout the next few years in the history. Thank you.